I knew that the quota for returning to the city wasn't easy to come by. Ethan tightly gripped my hand, his face filled with urgency. She wasn't in good health, and the doctor had said he needed to return to the city immediately for treatment. I know you're kind, he said, pleading. You'll agree to this, won't you? After all, Emily is your sister too. He looked at me with anticipation, his face even tinged with a faint blush. In my past life, I had been deceived by his appearance and agreed to give up my spot for him. Other youth volunteers mocked me behind my back, calling me foolish, but I didn't care. After all, Emily was his sister, and I believed Ethan would return for me. But what happened? Not long after returning to the city, he accepted Emily's confession, and the two even ended up in bed together. Calling her his sister didn't stop him from tarnishing the word with his actions. Anna, Ethan called out again, his tone now etched with blame. You also have a spot to return to the city. Why can't you let her have it? This was probably the first time I ever spoke back to him. Ethan froze, caught off guard. If she's your sister and is so urgently ill, shouldn't you, as her brother, give up your spot for her first? Why should someone else have to do it for you? He was stunned and stammered for a moment before finally replying. You don't understand. Emily will need to be hospitalized, handle paperwork, and have someone care for her once she's back. How could she possibly manage alone? He reached out to grab my hand, as if trying to comfort me like he used to. Aren't we family? He said, softly. But I caught a flash of impatience in his eyes, poorly concealed. In my past life, he only acted kind to me when he needed something. Back then, I couldn't see through him. I was so infatuated that I would have willingly given him my whole heart. But I had only raised a wolf in return. Disgusted, I stepped back, avoiding his hand. The wheat hasn't been harvested yet. I need to get to the field, I said curtly. Anna, he called after me. I ignored him and quickened my pace. Even the barking of the village dogs sounded more pleasant than his voice. By the time I reached the field, it was already late. Not wanting to delay the team's progress, I kept my head down and worked as fast as I could. After a grueling day, I finally finished. My stomach was growling with hunger, and my vision was starting to blur. Just as I was about to leave, Lauren and Sarah stopped me. Anna, you can't leave yet. You're in the same group as Emily. She didn't come today because she's sick. So you need to finish her work too. I widened my eyes in disbelief. Why? Sarah, who was close to Emily, rolled her eyes. Didn't Ethan tell you? He specifically assigned you to Emily's group. If you have a problem, go ask him. Ethan was the leader of the youth volunteer team, and his favoritism toward Emily was well known. Complaining wouldn't change a thing. Each team had a daily quota to meet, and I didn't want to drag others down. Gritting my teeth, I got back to work. As Sarah walked away, she sneered. Some volunteer you are. Can't even help out your fellow group member. Her crush on Ethan was an open secret, and she often teamed up with Emily to make things difficult for me. The cold wind slashed against my face and hands like knives. The longer I worked, the heavier the tools felt, and my vision blurred with bursts of golden light. Eventually, everything went black, and I collapsed. When I woke up, I was already at the village barefoot doctor's place. It's nothing serious, just hunger, the doctor said, handing me a bowl of water. I drank it and immediately noticed something unusual. Swishing the water around my mouth, I realized there was a faint sweetness. In these times, white sugar was a rare luxury. You should thank the youth volunteer who brought you here. The barefoot doctor, an older man who was always kind to us volunteers, said with a smile. When I heard about your severe malnutrition, I even got some sugar for you. He pointed to a small paper packet on the table beside him and emphasized, take it and eat it yourself when you get back. All right. The whole village knew how I scrimped and saved for Ethan and Emily, the siblings from the Song family. That's probably why the doctor felt the need to remind me. I thanked him, carefully pocketed the sugar, and made a mental note to return it to Daniel later. White sugar was a rare commodity in these times. Ethan had a weak stomach, so the tiny amount of white flour we were given was always reserved for him. Emily, being frail, got priority on the few eggs we could trade for. Meanwhile, I lived on the sweet potatoes and potatoes they wouldn't touch. shrinking down to a mere skeleton. At 5 feet 5 inches, my weight didn't even reach 80 pounds, which is why I had collapsed from exhaustion earlier. Thinking about how I had gone to such lengths to care for those two siblings, I wanted to slap myself. Ethan had always said, "Anna, take good care of Emily. She's your sister too." Sister. My foot. It was already dark by the time I returned. The youth volunteer quarters were lit, but I stood outside for a long moment, the cold piercing through to my bones. Ethan's attention was entirely on Emily, and it was clear neither of them had even noticed I hadn't come back. When I finally reached the door, I saw Ethan feeding Emily steamed egg custard. "Be good, Emily. Eat a little more," Ethan said gently, his arms supporting her as she clung to him. Looking so fragile she seemed ready to fall over. "Brother, you should eat too," Emily said softly. Ethan shook his head. "This is for you to recover. Anna must be possessed this time, refusing to give up her spot for you. I'll have to talk to her again tomorrow." Emily pouted. "If you don't eat, then I won't either. How about we share it like we did when we were kids?" Her voice grew softer as she lowered her head and scooped a bit of the custard onto a spoon. Then, to my disgust, she held it up to Ethan's mouth. Ethan gave a half-hearted protest. "Emily, we're adults now. This isn't appropriate." But he didn't move away, seeing their mouths practically about to touch. I coughed loudly from the doorway. They jumped apart like they'd been electrocuted, and the bowl of custard fell to the floor, shattering into pieces. "Anna." Ethan's anger flared first. "Why are you back so late?" He had the nerve to act like the victim. I let out a cold laugh. For a moment, I thought I'd walked into the wrong room. A little later, and the two of you might have kissed. "You have such a dirty mind," Ethan snapped without so much as a blush. "Emily is my sister. She just wanted to share her food with me." Emily, ever the actress, covered her face with her hands and began sobbing delicately. "It's all my fault. I wanted to let it cool before giving it to him, but I didn't think it would make you misunderstand. I'm sorry for being a burden. I didn't go to the fields today because I was sick. And now I've caused trouble for you. That's why you hate me, isn't it?" She spoke in a trembling voice, pounding her chest weakly for added effect. "It's all my fault for being so useless." Ethan immediately grabbed her hands, his face filled with disapproval. "Emily, don't treat yourself like this." With that, Emily threw herself into his arms, crying pitifully. Ethan turned his back to me, completely ignoring my presence. I caught Emily's gaze. It was filled with provocation. She was doing this on purpose. I couldn't stand the disgusting act these two were putting on any longer. "Are you done performing yet?" I asked coldly. It was only then that Ethan seemed to remember something. He quickly walked over to me. "Anna, Emily wasn't feeling well today. I thought it would be better for family to look out for each other, so I assigned her to your group. You ended up doing the work for 2 people. Thank you for that," he said with a polite smile. He then gestured to the shattered porcelain bowl on the floor. "Pick up the pieces and clean that up, will you? There's still some of the egg that didn't touch the floor. It's clean. You can eat it. Don't waste food." Ethan kept a full meter's distance from me as he spoke, his clean and sweet-smelling Emily standing out in stark contrast to my dirt-covered, sweat-soaked self. What a perfect picture. "Did you ask me about this beforehand?" I crossed my arms. "Family? My household registry isn't on the same page as you 2 siblings. I'm under no obligation to take care of her. And don't forget to credit me for the labor points. If she's got hands and feet, there's no reason for her to freeload off others." Ethan was always overly concerned about appearances, and I didn't lower my voice one bit. The youth volunteer quarters were close by, and I noticed some heads peeking out from the nearby doors, curious about the commotion. "Anna, what's gotten into you?" Ethan asked, clearly not understanding why I, who had always complied with his demands, was suddenly rebelling. "Nothing," I replied flatly, motioning for him to step aside. "I've just come to my senses. You want to pamper your sister? That's your business. Just don't drag me into it." The next morning, I left early with a small paper packet of sugar, intending to return it to Daniel. However, Ethan intercepted me on my way out. "Where are you going? What does this have to do with you?" he demanded. I didn't even bother looking at him. You're my fiancé. How could it not concern me? He insisted, his usual composed demeanor finally cracking. Your fiancé? I raised my eyes to him, no longer able to suppress my anger. Do you even know that I passed out yesterday from overexertion while doing Emily's work and had to be taken to the doctor? Ethan's face immediately changed. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. I sneered. You were too busy feeding eggs to your precious sister. By the way, starting today, we're splitting all labor points and ration tickets. Don't even think about using my share to support her. Ethan was furious. Anna, don't you know how to behave like a proper sister-in-law? He had used this line to manipulate me so many times before, and I had always given in. But now, whoever wants to be a sister-in-law can be one. Don't drag me into it. I shot back. Without waiting for his response, I turned and walked out. Ethan followed a few steps but was stopped when Emily, coughing dramatically from inside the house, called out to him in a pitiful voice. Brother. Her voice was so loud it could have woken the dead. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then stomped his foot and went back inside. Daniel didn't stay in the youth volunteer quarters. He lived in a small house on the edge of the village. As I approached his place, I noticed something about him that always struck me as different. Even though we all wore the same dull and worn-out clothes, he somehow stood apart. There was an air about him, like a flower blooming in a high and unreachable place. When I reached his door, there was a book lying open on the table, but he was nowhere to be seen. I hesitated, then called out tentatively, Daniel? Daniel! The door was open, so where could he have gone? My eyes fell on the book on the table. To my surprise, it was a practice workbook for the college entrance exam. I knew I shouldn't, but study materials for the college entrance exam were incredibly rare. The thought of taking the exam to get back to the city consumed me. I couldn't resist any longer and picked up the book. Just then, I heard the sound of water from next door. Instinctively, I turned toward the noise and immediately froze. Daniel was tipping a bucket of water over his head, the water cascading down his well-defined chest and abs. It was nothing like Ethan's pale and weak appearance. What was I even thinking? I instinctively covered my face, my cheeks burning. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I stammered. Daniel seemed equally startled. Pausing mid-motion, I quickly turned away, too embarrassed to look at him, and placed the sugar packet on the table. I'll leave now. Sorry about that. And here's the sugar I owe you. My words tumbled over themselves as I made my escape, my whole body feeling like it was on fire. Wait. Daniel's voice stopped me. I turned slightly to see him putting on a shirt, water still dripping from his hair. He walked toward me with steady steps and held out the sugar packet. Take it, he said firmly. I waved my hands frantically. No, I can't. It's too valuable. Don't you remember me? He asked, his eyebrows furrowing slightly. Fine. Didn't you say you wanted to thank me? Help me with math. And consider the sugar payment for your labor points. I thought I heard him mutter something under his breath. Something like, she didn't used to be this skittish. I hesitated but couldn't refuse his offer. Sugar. I could decline. But helping him study? That. I couldn't resist. Slowly, I turned back, only to meet his gaze. Open and unguarded. My heart thudded loudly in my chest. A long-forgotten memory surfaced in my mind, hazy but persistent. There was a local thug, the village leader's nephew, who had humiliated me before. Years after my death, I'd heard that he was arrested and executed for his crimes. Who had done it? Daniel handed me the book, pulling me back to the present. I took it from him and, swallowing my nerves, began the lesson. The more pages I flipped through, the more I wanted to sigh. It was a brand new workbook, pristine and untouched, save for a few answers scribbled in the margins. Eventually, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Have you even used this book before? I asked. Daniel didn't reply. Instead, the sound of steady breathing beside me made me realize he had fallen asleep. I nudged him gently. That's it for today. He groggily shook his head, his once perfectly combed hair now a mess. Take the sugar with you, he insisted, his voice firm. Once I give something, I don't take it back. I didn't expect what happened next. Emily somehow managed to stoop even lower than I thought possible. during a group session organized by the village to study Lei Feng's selfless spirit. She suddenly buried her face in her hands and began to cry. Emily was well liked by the team, so a group of volunteers, both men and women, immediately gathered around her, concerned. "What's wrong, Emily?" Her eyes were red and filled with tears. "Please don't worry about me. I feel so useless," she sobbed, her voice trembling. A chorus of comforting voices erupted around her. Among them, Sarah jumped in enthusiastically, as always, ready to stir the pot. "Did Anna bully you again? I just knew she was the worst. I'm sick," Emily choked out between sobs. "Very sick. I don't think I'll live to see the day we build our great nation." Her pale face, coupled with her red nose, made her look pitiful, like she truly had been wronged. Yet, in a show of false resilience, she lifted her head and said, "Please, everyone, stop worrying about me. I'm fine," Emily said weakly. Sarah immediately jumped in, pointing at me. "Why don't we just have Anna give up her spot to return to the city so Emily can get treatment?" The moment Emily started crying, several young male volunteers panicked and began circling around her, joining in the accusations. "Anna, how can you be so selfish? Emily is so sick, yet you refuse to give up your spot for her. What kind of spirit of Lei Feng is that? Someone like you doesn't deserve to return to the city. You should stay here in the village and continue your reform." Emily was truly despicable. When one tactic didn't work, she resorted to moral blackmail, using these hot-blooded volunteers to pressure me into giving up my spot. But what I didn't expect was for Emily to stagger toward me and then drop to her knees with a loud thud. "Anna, please," she cried, her voice trembling. "I know you've always disliked me because of how my brother takes care of me, but it's not like I chose to be this way. My health is poor, and isn't it natural for a brother to care for his sister?" That moment, Ethan walked in, just in time to see Emily kneeling before me. His face darkened instantly. "Anna, are you bullying Emily again?" he snapped. A crowd gathered around us, their voices overlapping in a chaotic mess. They all looked so righteous, but I knew their true intentions. Deep down, they were just bitter about their own inability to return to the city, so they seized every opportunity to act selflessly at someone else's expense. Everyone knew how valuable the city spots were. In the neighboring village, a female volunteer had even slept with a team leader in exchange for one. Some of these so-called volunteers here, realizing they might never make it back to the city, had secretly started relationships with local girls and even had children. Emily leaned weakly against Ethan's chest, but I caught the smug glint in her eyes. As always, Ethan chose her side without hesitation. Sarah, her face red with jealousy as she watched Ethan holding Emily, jumped to her defense, eager to impress him. "Ethan, Anna is so petty. She doesn't have a shred of Lei Feng's spirit. Emily is so sick, and she still refuses to give up her spot. She doesn't deserve it. Emily does." I let out a cold laugh. "I fainted just a few days ago. The doctor said I'm severely malnourished. Why don't you bring me the 20 eggs your family's hens laid this month, along with all the brown sugar you have, so I can recover?" Sarah instinctively retorted, her accent slipping in her flustered state. "That's impossible. My family's eggs are counted. My mom still needs." She stopped abruptly, realizing her mistake. Her face turned bright red, feigning shock. I widened my eyes. "You can't even spare me a few eggs. Yet you think I should give up my city spot with just a few words? How big is your sense of entitlement?" Embarrassed and humiliated in front of Ethan, Sarah stomped her foot, burst into tears, and ran off. Emily, seeing her little pawn fail so miserably, stepped forward herself. She reached out weakly and grabbed my hand. "Anna, I know my request is unreasonable." Before she could finish, I pulled my hand away without hesitation. "If you know it's unreasonable, why are you still asking? Your shamelessness is astounding." Ethan, who had been conveniently deaf and blind earlier, suddenly sprang into action. He rushed over and wrapped Emily in his arms as she immediately broke into tears. She loved playing this game, always putting on a pitiful act as though the world had wronged her. "Brother," she whimpered, her voice trembling. I had no interest in watching this pair of hypocrites put on their performance of sibling devotion. I turned to leave, but someone stepped in my way. A bespectacled male volunteer. "You're not leaving," he said sternly. "And why not?" I asked, nearly laughing from sheer frustration. In these times, jealousy over spots to return to the city was rampant. If anyone saw a chance to drag someone down, they took it eagerly. The mindset was simple: if I can't have it, why should you? Let's all rot together in this backwater village. The bespectacled male volunteer straightened his back with newfound confidence as others began to rally behind him. "You're not fit to be Ethan's wife," he sneered. Ethan's face darkened, and he finally spoke up. "Anna, I didn't expect you to be so selfish. If you don't give up your city spot for Emily, I don't see any point in continuing our engagement." I didn't even have time to retort with "who cares?" before a loud, mocking laugh rang out. A tall figure pushed through the crowd and stood protectively in front of me. It was Daniel. His posture was firm, exuding an aura of quiet authority. "Is this supposed to be a lesson on the spirit of Les Femmes?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Because from where I stand, it looks more like a reenactment of the white-haired girl. A bunch of landlords pressuring someone into submission. Have you all no shame?" For a moment, I was stunned. Daniel's stance reminded me of the time Ethan had stood in front of me in the past. But then I remembered. This wasn't Ethan. It was Daniel, who wasn't even supposed to be here today. The volunteers around us seemed to freeze, like someone had pressed the stop button on their tape recorder. Their faces flushed red with embarrassment. "What are you talking about?" someone stammered. Daniel's smile disappeared, replaced by a sharp, cold expression. "Explain yourselves. Why are you pressuring someone to give up their spot to return to the city? You." He pointed at one of the male volunteers. "Didn't you already get your city spot? Why didn't you give it up?" Then, he turned to the bespectacled volunteer, who had been the most vocal. "And you," Daniel continued, "weren't you just buttering up the team leader with gifts a few weeks ago, trying to secure your return? Did it work? No? Then why are you here, harassing someone else?" The targeted volunteers turned pale, their bluster fading. You're talking nonsense." The bespectacled volunteer sputtered, but his voice was shaky. Someone nearby tugged on his sleeve, whispering, "Don't provoke him. Daniel has connections." Emily, trying to defuse the tension, stepped forward with her usual pitiful act. "Daniel, please don't be like this. They were only standing up for me." "And what about you?" Daniel cut her off sharply, not even pretending to be polite. "You barely contribute your labor points. Returning to the city requires merit. Do you deserve it? When Anna worked so hard she fainted in the fields. Where were you?" Emily opened her mouth but couldn't find the words to respond. Her eyes turned red as tears welled up. "Daniel," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I know you've always liked Anna, but..." That was the wrong move. The air grew tense as Ethan suddenly snapped, his face twisted with anger. But he didn't dare lash out at Daniel. Instead, he stormed over to me, grabbed my arm roughly, and dragged me toward Emily. "Apologize to Emily," he demanded. Even now, Ethan was still trying to force me to apologize. "I won't," I said firmly. "I did nothing wrong." Ethan's grip tightened, his strength overpowering mine. I gritted my teeth, glaring at him. "I want to return to the city to study and take the college entrance exam. If you don't want your sister to suffer, then you give her your spot." Ethan's face fell, his voice full of disappointment. "You've let me down. Anna, can't you just wait a few years?" I cut him off before he could finish. "Then why don't you wait a few years?" Daniel stepped forward, prying Ethan's hand off my arm with ease. He leaned in close, his voice low but firm, audible only to Ethan, Emily, and me. "Say another word, Ethan, and I'll make sure you don't return to the city either." Ethan's face turned ashen. Daniel's background had always been a mystery, but there was clearly something about him that even Ethan didn't dare challenge. Later that night, I heard whispers that Emily had gone to see Daniel in private. Whatever happened, she returned to her room furious and cried loudly enough to shake the walls. Let her cry herself hoarse for all I care. Ethan spent the entire night comforting her, and from what I could tell, he never left her room. But none of that mattered to me anymore. I turned over in bed, My thoughts drifting as questions started to rise. I remembered that in my previous life, Daniel had left soon after. He hadn't even stayed long enough to see the official day when we were allowed to return to the city. Could it be that my spot to return had been secured by Daniel? But I didn't expect what happened the next morning. Despite spending the whole night comforting Emily, Ethan still had the audacity to show up. His face darkened with irritation and scold me. "Anna, since when have you been involved with Daniel?" "What?" I asked, startled by his tone. He acted like he had caught me red-handed, shaking off his frustration like a drenched dog trying to reclaim some sense of superiority. "Don't think you're so special just because you're close to him," Ethan sneered. "People from families like his only come to the countryside as a formality. You'll regret it." Whether or not Daniel had regrets, I didn't know. But Emily clearly did. And it must have been eating her alive. 3 days later, a jeep came to take Daniel away. That was when we found out the truth. Daniel was the son of a powerful and well-connected family. The kind of person everyone in the village only ever heard about in rumors. I saw the shock and regret in Emily's wide eyes, practically spilling over. Before Daniel left, he made a point of pulling me aside in front of everyone, loud enough for all to hear. He said, "Study hard and get back to the city. Build something great." Thanks to that one sentence, nobody dared to try to take my city spot again. 3 months later, I finally stepped onto the road back to the city. Ethan was there too. In those months, he had toned down his antics and stopped stirring up trouble. But to my surprise, he hadn't brought Emily with him. I raised an eyebrow in mild astonishment. Something about this life felt different from the last. Ethan hadn't always been like this. Our families were close, intertwined by generations of friendship. My father and his were comrades in arms who had faced life and death situations together. My mother and his mother had been childhood best friends. We were so close that Ethan and I had shared a cradle as babies, growing up together. As children, we were inseparable. He was my childhood sweetheart in every sense of the word. In kindergarten, Ethan would puff out his small chest and shield me if anyone dared to tease me. "You can't bully Anna," he'd say with determination. The adults found it amusing and teased him. "Why not?" "Because Anna is my bride," he'd declare with the utmost seriousness. And he meant it. He always gave me the best of everything. His favorite treats, the toys he loved most. We even sat next to each other in school. One afternoon during nap time, sunlight streamed through the windows. When I woke up, I saw Ethan with his hand shielding my eyes from the sun. Seeing I was awake, he smiled gently. "You're awake," he said softly. For a long time, I truly believed we would grow up and live happily ever after, like in the fairy tales. That belief shattered when I turned 13. My parents died in an accident, and Ethan's family took me in. For a while, things were still good. But 2 years later, his mother passed away from illness. Just 6 months after that, Ethan's father remarried, bringing Emily into the family. She wasn't even his biological daughter, just the child of his new wife from a previous marriage. To please Ethan's father, they even gave her his last name. First, Ethan hated Emily. He resented his stepmother for so quickly taking over his mother's place. But Emily was a master manipulator. She knew how to act pitiful, to coo and flatter. She would pout, cry, and play the role of a frightened rabbit needing protection. And somewhere along the way, his heart gradually leaned toward Emily. First, he told me, she and her mother are no good. Later, he said, the matters between the adults aren't Emily's fault. As Ethan's father rose higher in his career, the talk about his remarriage faded away. And eventually, they truly became a family. The way he doted on Emily now, he used to treat me the same way. That's why he was so skilled at it. In my previous life, I honestly believed he treated Emily like a little sister who needed protection. I naively assumed the role of a caring older sister-in-law, taking on responsibilities as if they were natural. If they wanted something and I had it, I gave it. There was nothing I wouldn't sacrifice for them. But even someone like Emily couldn't convince Ethan to give up his spot to return to the city. This cold and selfish man had only ever truly loved himself. After returning to the city, I had originally planned to move back into my family home. But the property had long since been reclaimed by my parents' work unit. With both my parents gone, if I wanted to study, I needed a registered household and a place to live. Left with no other choice, I had to return to the Song family home. Ethan's father, Uncle Song, told me to stay without worry. He even helped me contact schools for enrollment. But he was often busy with work, leaving me to deal with Ethan's stepmother, Mrs. Wong, who showed me nothing but disdain. In front of Uncle Song, she pretended to be polite, but as soon as he left, her true colors emerged. She spent her days nitpicking everything I did, throwing passive-aggressive remarks my way. I avoided her as much as possible. As soon as school ended, I would lock myself in my room, only coming out when absolutely necessary. Barely a few days after I returned, Mrs. Wong invited her relatives over for dinner. The dining table was lively, filled with chatter and laughter, when she suddenly began to cry. "My poor Emily," she sobbed. "Her health is so fragile, and she had to endure such hardships in that place. If anything happens to her, I don't think I can go on living." Though Uncle Song tried to smooth things over, the atmosphere became awkward. The table full of relatives alternated between consoling Mrs. Wong and forcing themselves to laugh and talk louder to distract from her tears. Not one of them welcomed me back. Ethan sat among them, casting judgmental glances in my direction, as if silently accusing me. "Why weren't you the one left in the countryside? Why didn't you give up your spot?" These were the same people who had once held me as a child, teasing me and playing with me. Now that my parents were gone, they didn't bother hiding their true selves. Or maybe this was who they had always been, and they no longer felt the need to pretend in front of someone like me. Ethan and I ended up attending the same school. I immediately applied for dormitory housing, but the teacher said the dorms were currently full, and I'd have to wait a while. I had no choice but to grit my teeth and endure for a little longer. Ethan refused to walk with me to or from school, still holding a grudge and clearly wanting to punish me. At school, I was practically invisible, which suited me fine. All I wanted was to focus on my studies. A month later, on my birthday, I returned home to find the dining table full of people. The room was filled with cheerful chatter and laughter. Even Ethan, who hadn't smiled at me in weeks, greeted me with a rare grin, holding a gift in his hands. "Anna's back," he said warmly. For a moment, I was stunned. Before Emily came into the picture, every year, Ethan had personally prepared birthday gifts for me. I froze, unable to process the scene before me. I heard Ethan say, "Emily is back. Everyone's here celebrating her today. What gift did you bring for her?" Turning my head, I saw Emily sitting at the table, tears and laughter mingling as Mrs. Wong hugged her tightly. "My poor baby. You've suffered so much," she cried dramatically. It felt like a bubble inside me popped. I was still living under the Song family's roof, so I took a deep breath, kept my expression blank, and quietly retreated to my room. From behind the closed door, I could still hear the Song family relatives calling me ill-mannered and Mrs. Wong's passive-aggressive remarks. We went through so much trouble to bring Emily back to the city. And for what? Just to raise an ungrateful wolf in our midst. Their words didn't anger me. I only found them laughable. In my previous life, they had so many other ways to achieve their goals, but they had chosen to come after what was mine. At school, I had hoped to remain invisible, blending into the background as I focused on my studies. But with Emily's arrival, Mrs. Wong started sending the Song family driver to take her and Ethan to and from school every day. Uncle Song had initially objected, saying it was too ostentatious, but Mrs. Wong's crocodile tears quickly silenced him. "If the car is going anyway, let Anna ride too," Uncle Song suggested. I had already walked past the car when they forcibly called me back to get in. One street away from the school, Emily asked the driver to stop. "Anna," she said sweetly, "since you and my brother aren't married yet, arriving together might cause misunderstandings. It wouldn't be good for your reputation." "Right." I didn't bother arguing with her. I simply got out of the car and walked the rest of the way. After school, as I reached the front gate, I saw the Song family's car speeding away. Through the side window, I caught a glimpse of Emily's smug smile. The Song family had a decent social standing, and Emily, riding on Ethan's coattails, quickly gained popularity in our class. In no time, she was surrounded by a group of friends. Meanwhile, Rumors about me started spreading throughout the school. They claimed I only got into this prestigious school through connections. They said I was just some country girl who didn't deserve to attend the best high school. The rumors spiraled out of control. And someone even reported me to the Education Bureau, accusing me of using backdoor connections to enroll. The homeroom teacher called me in for a meeting. "Anna," he said, "these rumors about you are affecting both the class and the school's reputation. There's even been a complaint filed with the Education Bureau. The school is considering advising you to withdraw." The disciplinary director, seated next to him, nodded in agreement. "Our school has always been known for its excellent academic and moral standards. We can't allow something like this to tarnish our reputation." "Why?" I countered firmly. "I'm a youth volunteer who was sent to the countryside. The school knew that when I enrolled. My previous academic records are all verifiable. Or does the school discriminate against youth volunteers?" Their expressions changed immediately. The Down to the Countryside movement was a national policy. Criticizing it could be seen as criticizing the government itself. And no one wanted to risk their career over that. The disciplinary director quickly switched his tone, attempting to defuse the situation. "Anna, you're being unreasonable. How can you speak to your teachers so disrespectfully? For now, take a month off from school to reflect on your actions at home." Before I could respond, a calm, feminine voice interjected. "I've heard that Anna is an excellent student, both academically and in character." Startled, I turned toward the voice. It was my first time meeting the principal, but something about her seemed familiar. The disciplinary director's face darkened. "Principal Wang, we can't let Yutsai High's decades-long reputation be ruined by one student. Just because some families have connections doesn't mean we should make exceptions for them. Who even knows if her previous grades were legitimate?" This was outright nonsense. The insinuation, between the lines, was that Principal Wang had some personal bias and had allowed me into the school unfairly. I interrupted their charade. "Yutsai High has never said that transfer students are forbidden, right? The issue here is focused on my grades. I'm willing to take an exam on the spot. Teachers can write the questions. And if I can prove my grades, can I stay?" No one expected me to be so direct. After some discussion among the teachers, they decided to let me take the exam immediately. As we waited for the test papers, a shadow flickered past the window. I glanced at it, and for a moment, it seemed like Daniel, but I must have been mistaken. Since returning, I'd been keeping an eye out, but I hadn't seen him anywhere near Yutsai High. In front of everyone, I completed 3 sets of tests in language, literature, and foreign studies. The teachers graded them on the spot, and as they reviewed my answers, I watched their expressions change little by little. By the end, several teachers' eyes were shining with approval. "The scores are excellent," one of them finally said. The principal smiled at me warmly. "Anna, keep up the good work." Then, turning to the disciplinary director, his tone turned cold. "Director Zhu, I've received a report about you accepting bribes. Let's have a talk in my office." I stared wide-eyed as this unfolded. Few days later, Director Zhu was quietly dismissed, his reputation in shambles. Much later, I learned that Mrs. Wang had bribed him. Not only had she secured Emily's admission into the school, but she had also tried to have me expelled in the process. Thinking back, it seemed that in my previous life, Emily hadn't just taken my spot to return to the city. She had likely stolen a series of opportunities and achievements that were meant for me. Afterward, the first monthly exams took place, and I earned the top score. Most of my classmates weren't bad people. Gradually, they started coming to me for help with their studies. First, I didn't mind. If someone had questions, I'd do my best to answer them. As word spread, more and more classmates came to me, and my relationships with them slowly improved. One afternoon during lunch, a girl hesitantly placed a chicken drumstick from her lunchbox into mine. "I'm sorry, Anna," she said shyly. "I believed those rumors about you, and thought you were the kind of person who didn't like talking to others." Other classmates quickly followed suit, apologizing profusely. "Yeah, we were wrong." One of them admitted, "You're not only kind but also so patient. We shouldn't have listened to those rumors." From that point on, the class split into 2 distinct factions. One group, like me, focused on studying hard and aiming for a good university. The other consisted of Emily and her followers, who were less interested in academics and more about enjoying her status as the center of attention. This dynamic intrigued me. I quietly observed Emily. In my previous life, she had managed to attend university. She had used my stolen grades to return to the city and take the college entrance exams. What was stopping her from using someone else's identity to get into college again? Who would be her victim this time? Due to the high number of college entrance exam participants, there was a preliminary test before the official one. Only those who passed the preliminary would qualify for the actual exam. I had long distanced myself from the song's siblings. Emily, meanwhile, poured all her energy into flirting with men, completely neglecting her studies. Her grades were abysmal, but there was no way she could stand seeing me succeed. The night before the preliminary exam, Uncle Song and Mrs. Wang knocked on my door. "Anna," Uncle Song said kindly, "tomorrow is your preliminary test. Here's a glass of milk to wish you good luck." I accepted the glass but didn't drink it. Instead, I held it in my hands. Mrs. Wang's gaze was fixed on me, her tone overly sweet yet insistent. "Go on, drink it. You'll sleep better and be in top shape for tomorrow." I kept my composure and watched her carefully. In the corner of the room, I spotted Emily's shadow lurking, hiding behind the wall. I calmly organized my exam admission slip and said, "I'll drink the milk later and bring it out." Uncle Song nodded approvingly. "Anna has always been a responsible child." "Good. Then your aunt and I won't disturb you anymore." He took a few steps toward the door but turned back suddenly. "Don't forget to drink the milk." Once they shut the door, the polite smile on my face vanished. Was Uncle Song truly unaware of what was happening? After some time, I took the empty glass out and handed it back, then turned off the lights and pretended to fall asleep. Late in the night, when everything was silent, a shadow crept into my room. I watched as the figure turned on a flashlight and began rummaging through my packed school bag. The moment they grabbed my exam slip, I turned on the light abruptly. "What are you doing?" Emily let out a sharp scream. Startled, she instinctively hid her hand behind her back. "And nothing," she stammered. "You're stealing my exam admission slip," I accused, climbing out of bed and stepping toward her. "No, I'm not." Emily's voice trembled as she backed away, her entire body shaking. "Then what are you doing in my room?" That moment, Ethan burst into the room, shielding Emily like an enraged lion. "Anna, why are you bullying Emily again?" He yelled at me, then immediately softened his tone as he turned to her. "Emily, are you okay?" Emily started crying, her sobs loud and dramatic. I just didn't want Anna to take the exam. Brother likes her so much. I'm afraid if she passes, she won't come back anymore." She twisted the truth further. At school, so many people like her. Even when she was sent to the countryside, Daniel protected her. What did I do wrong? I just want what's best for my brother. Mrs. Wang barged in, tears streaming down her face, with Uncle Song following close behind. "You silly child. How could you do something like this?" Uncle Song scolded. But then Emily lost it. She grabbed the exam slip and suddenly tore it to pieces. "I won't let you take the exam," she screamed, throwing the shredded pieces into the toilet and flushing them. Then she collapsed into Ethan's arms, wailing uncontrollably. I stared at her, appalled. How could someone be this shameless? "I'm calling the police," I said, straightening my posture and glaring coldly at the group before me. Uncle Song frowned. "Anna, don't be so impulsive." It was as if someone had pressed the pause button. Emily's sobs stopped abruptly, and Mrs. Wang fixed me with a sharp, threatening stare. "Anna, don't forget whose house you're living in." Seeing how everything had unfolded, I realized the truth. This was all a setup, orchestrated by the Song family. I looked at their conniving faces and let out a cold laugh. I'm the school's top student, a candidate for Tsinghua or Peking University. If I don't show up for the preliminary exam, do you think the school won't contact you? Ethan puffed out his chest, righteous as ever. "You can just say the pressure was too much, and you chose to give up." I couldn't help but laugh. Me? The top-ranked student? Giving up due to pressure? Who else would pass if I didn't? I turned to Emily, my voice dripping with mockery. "Emily, Even if I handed you the answers, do you think you'd understand them? Uncle Song's face darkened. Anna, I know what Emily did was wrong. But she's still young. Young. I sneered. She's old enough to sabotage my future. But when it comes to accountability, she's suddenly just a child? Spare me. You can always repeat the year if needed. But I absolutely won't allow you to make a scene about this, Uncle Song said, his tone leaving no room for argument. And what authority do you have to demand that from me? I asked calmly. His face turned an ashen gray, probably because this was the first time I had ever stood up to him. I smiled at him, though it was devoid of warmth. Uncle Song, this will be the last time I address you as uncle. Out of respect for the relationship my parents had with you, I've held back again and again. I won't call the police to arrest Emily. But starting tomorrow, I'm moving out. I don't need you to pay for my tuition or living expenses, but I demand to retain my student status. And as for the so-called engagement between me and Ethan, it ends here. Modern China doesn't support arranged marriages, and I expect never to hear such nonsense from anyone again. I turned to Mrs. Wang and added, as for how Emily got into this school, I'm sure you and Uncle Song know better than I do. By the way, Director Zhu is already out of the picture. What a shame for you. My academic performance is under Principal Wang's special attention, so there won't be any more issues. Right. Anna. Ethan, furious, let out an indignant bark of protest, but I slammed the door in his face, shutting out his angry rants. That night, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning, I got up as usual and prepared to head to the exam. Emily's eyes were bloodshot, but her smug expression was impossible to miss. What's the point of going? You don't even have your exam slip, she taunted. I glanced at her and retorted, you have your slip, don't you? Let's see if you can pass. Emily was so enraged that she sputtered incoherently, her frustration evident. Ethan, looking pale and unwell, had developed a fever from staying up late the night before. When he heard Emily's loud complaints that morning, he finally snapped. Can you stop yelling so early in the morning? If you hadn't made such a scene last night, I wouldn't be feeling like this today, he scolded. Emily's face crumpled as she burst into tears, crying dramatically about how unfair everything was. I ignored them both, walking out the door with a muttered, ridiculous. Today was my preliminary exam, and Emily's brain, which was about the size of a walnut, couldn't focus on anything except chasing men. Neither Mrs. Wang nor Emily tried to stop me. They probably assumed I wouldn't be able to take the test without my exam slip, so they let me go without a fuss. When I arrived at the exam venue, I pulled out the slip I had hidden the night before, took a deep breath, and entered the exam hall. This was the moment I had been waiting for across 2 lifetimes. My chance to change my destiny. I wouldn't let anyone take it from me. The exam lasted 2 days, and during that time, I didn't return to the Song household. Instead, I stayed at Principal Wang's house. Ever since the monthly exam, she had taken me under her wing. There was something familiar about her features, a sense of recognition I couldn't quite place. It lingered in my mind until the exam was over, and I returned to the Song house. When I walked in, I was greeted by the sight of a young man standing with his back to me, unpacking his belongings. He looked travel-worn, as though he had just arrived. It was Daniel. I froze, my eyes widening. Daniel. He turned around with a cheerful expression. You're back from the exam. What are you doing here? We asked simultaneously, before pausing to process each other's words. Then, as the pieces clicked into place, I blurted, Principal Wang is your mother? He seemed just as surprised. This is your house? Before we could say more, Principal Wang appeared from the kitchen, holding a tray of watermelon slices. Anna, you're back. Come have some watermelon. Ignore that brat, she said with a playful smile. I stood there, still a little dazed. It was only now that the puzzle pieces from the past few weeks began to fall into place. Why had Principal Wang appeared at just the right time to stand up for me? Why had she offered to take me in during the exam? It was all because of Daniel. That evening, Principal Wang even cooked a feast, filling the table with dishes. She called out to us warmly, Anna, Daniel, wash your hands and come eat. It was a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. the kind that reminded me of family. But why are you helping me? I couldn't help but ask Daniel. He said nothing, merely reached out and flicked my forehead lightly. Think about it yourself, he said with a smirk. Why didn't you attend high school? I asked him. I've made progress. Haven't I? He replied with a shrug. He casually added, it's not like I specifically took leave just to watch you take your college entrance exam. Don't get any ideas. When I returned to the Song household, they had already arranged a place for me to stay. It was a small dormitory room for part-time workers. Old, run down, but relatively safe. They didn't want to face public criticism. After all, I took the key, packed my small bag, and left. My belongings were meager. A few books and a couple of changes of clothes. I hadn't even unpacked them since the day I arrived because I knew I wouldn't stay for long. When the preliminary exam results were announced, both Ethan and Emily failed. My name, however, was on the list of students qualified to take the official college entrance exam. Emily was livid. She stormed up to my desk, completely forgetting her usual facade. She screamed, "Liar! Didn't you lose your exam slip? How did you take the preliminary exam?" I looked at her in mock surprise. I had my slip. Why wouldn't I be able to take the exam? Emily's face turned bright red with anger. You, she stammered, but stopped herself. She still had enough sense not to reveal the foolish thing she'd done. If she hadn't been so eager to flush the torn-up slip down the toilet, worried I might piece it back together, she would have noticed it was a fake. Through gritted teeth, she hissed, "You just wait." I met her glare without flinching and replied coldly, "Oh, I'll remember this day. Just like you'll remember that you don't even qualify to take the exam." Ethan came charging over, his face flushed with anger. He raised his hand as if to hit me. "You've changed, Anna," he yelled. I stood my ground, showing no fear. "What? Are you going to hit me?" Before he could follow through, Daniel appeared and caught his wrist. Daniel had been assigned by Principal Wong to act as my escort, even attending classes with me. Her reasoning was simple. Who knew what else the Song family might try? While I appreciated the gesture, it still felt strange having him around all the time. Daniel's tone was light but cutting as he addressed the siblings. It's funny how jealousy makes people act like spoiled children. Just because you can't achieve something, you throw tantrums like kids who can't have candy. The students around us, having overheard the exchange, began whispering in disapproval. How shameless can they be? If they're so capable, why don't they take the exam themselves instead of threatening Anna? Ethan glared at me, his voice trembling. You're not living at home anymore because of him, aren't you? I didn't even look at him. That's none of your business. You're mine. Ethan snapped, the words fiancé, barely leaving his mouth before Daniel grabbed him by the collar and dragged him out of the classroom. Let's have a little chat outside, Daniel said calmly. When Ethan returned, one of his eyes was swollen and bruised. He said nothing, looking humiliated and furious. He silently packed his belongings, pushed away Emily when she tried to approach, and stormed out of the classroom. Emily stomped her foot angrily but didn't follow Ethan. Instead, she turned and sought out another one of her wealthy admirers at school. It seemed her backup plan had arrived early. When the college entrance exam results came out, I ranked first. The Song family suddenly became all smiles, showing up at the school to find me. In front of reporters interviewing the top students, they loudly declared, "Anna is part of our family. We've always done everything for her. Her parents passed away years ago, and she's been living with us ever since. When we had a spot for the youth volunteer program, we gave it to her first. Oh, and now that Anna's ranked first, could the school admit her brother too?" Mrs. Wong, dressed to impress, kept pushing Emily closer to me, smiling brightly. "This is her sister, Emily. She's also a very bright child." Before the Song family could make even more unreasonable demands, Principal Wong arrived. She showed no intention of saving face for them, immediately calling security to escort them out. "Anna's success is entirely her own hard work," she declared firmly. "It has nothing to do with anyone else. And don't think you can take advantage of her achievements." Mrs. Wong, who had previously boasted to everyone about how much she had done to nurture me, was humiliated in front of the crowd. Even Uncle Song lost face among his colleagues and stormed off in a fit of anger, his sleeves practically flapping as he left. Later, Ethan came to find me. His expression was complicated. "Anna, you're incredible," he said. I turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm. His tone was patronizing, as if he were doing me a favor. "I think we should reconsider our engagement." I quickly yanked my sleeve out of his grip. "Go find your precious Emily," I said, barely holding back my disgust. What bad luck to have ever been tied to this family. What I hadn't expected, however, was for both Ethan and Emily to receive college admission letters. This was the pivotal moment in the Song family's rise to power. In my previous life, Uncle Song had seized this opportunity to align himself with the right people, paving the way for his smooth ascent. Back then, Emily had stolen my academic records and taken my place. Her forgery went unnoticed, and the Song family reaped the benefits. But this time, things were different. Their fraudulent actions didn't escape notice. Director Zhu, who had been fired earlier, filed an official complaint under his real name, exposing Emily's fake academic records. A thorough investigation followed, and Ethan's involvement was uncovered as well. During this era, in 1977, when the college entrance exam was newly reinstated, it was the sole gateway to changing one's destiny. The exposure of such a scandal caused a nationwide uproar. Uncle Song was arrested and sentenced to prison, though his sentence wasn't long. However, his political career was completely ruined. Ethan was sent back to the countryside as part of a punitive measure, but this time, there was no one to protect him, due to the Song family's now disgraced status. He was assigned to Heilongjiang province, the harshest environment for re-education. Emily, on the other hand, managed to stay in the city. In my previous life, Uncle Song had leveraged this opportunity to secure a favor for Emily, but this time, Mrs. Wang used the family's remaining influence to get her into a new school. However, Emily remained as unrepentant as ever. Shortly after entering the new school, she began pursuing another wealthy heir. Unfortunately for her, this man already had a fiancé, someone from a family far more powerful than his own. It wasn't long before the fiancé arrived at the school, leading a group of people. Emily was dragged into the women's restroom, stripped of her clothes, and publicly shamed. The fiancé loudly declared Emily to be shameless for seducing someone else's fiancé, ensuring that her reputation was completely destroyed. By the time Ethan returned during the nationwide youth volunteer recall, this scandal had already unfolded. He was dark-skinned and emaciated, his eyes hollow and lifeless. He looked like a 40-year-old vagrant despite being much younger. When Emily first saw him, she didn't even recognize him and screamed, "Let go of me, you pervert." Ethan, visibly shaken, said, "Emily, it's me. Look carefully." It was only when she recognized his voice that she realized who he was. But instead of relief, she recoiled from him as if she had seen a ghost. "Why are you back?" Ethan's mental state was clearly unstable. His bloodshot eyes filled with rage as he pulled out a knife and stabbed Emily in the abdomen. "You wretch! You ruined everything!" he screamed. Emily died on the spot, and Ethan was arrested and sent to prison. In the following months, I began receiving letters from him, filled with rambling apologies. He claimed to have regained memories of his previous life, repeatedly writing about how sorry he was, how much he missed me, and how Emily was not human. His letters ended with desperate pleas for me to save him. I only read the first letter. The rest I returned unopened. After being admitted to university, I gained the favor of my mentor. Before I even graduated with my bachelor's degree, he invited me to join his research team. I entered a combined program for my master's and PhD. And after graduation, I went directly into a classified research institute. I devoured knowledge like a starving person, working tirelessly day and night on my research. During this time, Daniel visited me a few times. He looked aggrieved each time. "Anna, when will you finally come back?" he asked. I had always known his feelings for me, but I could only smile apologetically and shake my head. "Daniel, I'm sorry," I said, "but my heart is set on dedicating myself to the country's scientific research." The last time I saw him off, he hugged me tightly. "Anna," he said, his voice low but firm. I won't hold you back. You're like an eagle soaring freely in the sky. But I hope you'll consider me. I'll wait for you until you're 35 years old. If, by then, you're willing. I placed my hand over his lips and shook my head. Swearing an oath is one of the least reliable things in the world. Don't bind yourself with a promise. But he looked at me with such a hurt expression. I've liked you since I was 5 years old. During that summer vacation. Don't you remember me? Finally, I remembered. My eyes widened in shock. You were that little boy from next door. Daniel, clearly exasperated, growled. Who's that little boy? It's Daniel. It all came back to me. The summer when I was 5 years old. It was a cicada-filled season, and my parents were still alive. I played freely in the residential compound. Daniel, however, didn't speak much. Every day, he sat alone by the window, feeling sorry for him. I dragged a little stool to his window every day to talk to him. What's your name? I'd ask. I had long since forgotten his answer, but we grew closer. And every day he would sneak candies from a tin and apples from his house to give to me. He made me promise something, but it was so long ago that I couldn't recall what it was. All I remembered was that the apples and candies were delicious. But before summer vacation ended, he suddenly left. I was heartbroken for a while, mainly because there was no one to give me snacks anymore. Daniel pinched my cheeks angrily. I recognized you the first time I saw you again. And you? You go off working yourself to the bone for other men. How heartless. I finally understood all he had done for me. When I turned 35, I transitioned to the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Leaving my classified post, Daniel wasted no time proposing to me. A year later, we had a beautiful daughter. With that, I completely severed ties with the past life. The fireworks of life, once set ablaze for others, were now mine to enjoy. Freedom was finally mine. As I galloped toward the future,